After 4 days of on-site visits, the UN experts investigating a chemical strike on civilians have now left Syria. The samples collected will be processed in Europe, and results are expected to take up to 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Russia's president is dismissing as nonsense America's claims that the regime is to blame, telling the US to provide proof before taking a fundamental decision such as military intervention. And saved by his age, an Indian teenager accused of taking part in the fatal gang rape of a young woman on a moving bus is sentenced to 3 years in a reform home. He should be hanged, says the victim's mother. Hello, I'm Nadia Sharbi. Thank you for watching France 24. The Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in the Netherlands is waiting to receive a set of samples that could change the course of the Syrian war. Blood, urine and soil samples taken this week by UN experts who visited the site of the August 21st chemical attack are being sent to 2 European laboratories for testing, and results are expected to be announced within 2 weeks. But with the US vowing to punish the Assad regime for the strike, a military response may come before that, especially now that the UN team has left the country. William Hildebrand has the latest.
Finished after 4 days collecting evidence, UN inspectors have left Damascus and arrived in Lebanon with samples from last week's alleged chemical attack. Diplomats said UN Chief Ban Ki-moon told the Security Council it may be 2 weeks before tests yield final results. The chemical experts took samples from clothes and various objects, but also collected human hair, blood, and urine from the dead and from survivors. The experts' original mission in Syria was to visit 3 sites to investigate claims of chemical weapons use. But that was put on hold after the alleged chemical attack on a Damascus suburb on August 21st. 5 days after this attack and following international pressure, the Assad regime finally allowed UN inspectors to investigate the site. But they were forced to briefly suspend their mission when a sniper shot at their convoy. On Friday, the inspectors made their last visit, this time to a hospital in Damascus, where soldiers loyal to the Assad regime say they were victims of a chemical attack perpetrated by the rebels. Though U.S. Secretary John Kerry said that the United States already has the facts and the evidence points to the Assad regime, he says the challenge is finding what the appropriate international response should be. The UN team is expected to return later to investigate other alleged chemical attacks.
Well, the scenario of a US-led military intervention is meeting some resistance, including domestically. The latest opinion polls show little public support for such a plan, a stumbling block John Kerry recognised during his White House briefing. Let's take a listen.
So let me be clear. We will continue talking to the Congress, talking to our allies, and most importantly, talking to the American people. President Obama will ensure that the United States of America makes our own decisions on our own timelines based on our values and our interests. Now, we know that after a decade of conflict, the American people are tired of war. Believe me, I am too. But fatigue does not absolve us of our responsibility. Just longing for peace does not necessarily bring it about. And history would judge us all extraordinarily harshly if we turned a blind eye to a dictator's wanton use of weapons of mass destruction against all warnings, against all common understanding of decency.
So with that, the Obama administration appears to be preparing itself to strike and is working on building a coalition of like-minded allies. Now, while Britain's David Cameron was voted down in Parliament, France, Turkey and Australia have all stated their support for an intervention.
Barack Obama met with his national security team on Friday. The U.S. president also spoke with his French counterpart, François Hollande. The 2 leaders agreed the Syrian regime must be held accountable for its alleged use of chemical weapons. Obama said he's considering a limited, narrow act that does not include sending American soldiers onto Syrian soil. With Saturday's departure of UN investigators from Syria, analysts expect a strike could occur any day now.
Cruise missiles, perhaps, and a day or 2 of strikes is probably enough to achieve the immediate purpose of restoring deterrence of weapons of mass destruction use, and hopefully getting countries like Iran and North Korea to notice that as they pursue or consider pursuing nuclear ambitions, that President Obama's red lines towards them still mean something as well.
Potential Syrian targets could be government buildings, military bases, and stockpiles of chemical weapons. The British Parliament voted against a Syrian intervention. For now, that means a coalition of two, the United States and France.
I think it's highly likely that the French Navy will attack the Syrian Navy, and then the American Navy will attack overland targets with longer-range weapons. By all indications, President Obama is leaning towards a very symbolic strike more than a substantive strike designed to level the playing field or change the balance of power.
Most agree the question is not if there will be an intervention, but when. As François Hollande put it, the only option not on the table is to do nothing.
Well, while the Friends of Syria are working on a battle plan and timetable, President Assad's main ally is looking on with scepticism. Speaking to the press this Saturday, Russian President Vladimir Putin dismissed as nonsense the US claims that the regime was behind the chemical attack and demanded that the White House provide proof. Let's take a listen to him.
As for the position of our American colleagues, friends, who insist that Syrian government forces used mass destruction weapons, chemical weapons in this case, and say that they have evidence, let them present them to UN inspectors and to the Security Council. The evidence should be presented. If the evidence is not presented, there is no evidence.
Moving to other world news, 3 years in a reform home as punishment for the brutal rape and fatal beating of a young woman. That's the sentence passed down by a juvenile court in New Delhi this Saturday. The first controversial verdict in a case of gang rape that grabbed the headlines last December and thrust the issue of women's safety into the limelight. Julia Seeger has more.
The teenager, who was believed to be 17 at the time of the crime, has been tried as a juvenile, despite calls by the victim's family for the adult sentence, the death penalty.
I'm not happy with this verdict. We want him to be hanged, and we'll challenge this verdict in the High Court. By not punishing him, this verdict is encouraging other teenagers to indulge in such acts.
The victim, a 23-year-old student, died of internal injuries after being raped and assaulted with an iron bar by 6 men, including the teenager, last December. The brutal attack set off nationwide protests about India's treatment of women and pushed Parliament to pass tougher laws against rapists. Children's rights groups have called for public restraint over the verdict, as many now want to see suspects 16 and older be tried as adults. Others believe that's beside the point.
Reducing the age is not a solution. I think, again, the 16, 18, 14, 21, 25, what should be the age? If tomorrow a 14-year-old commits a crime, then whether you want it should reduce to 14, tomorrow 12, then 12. We need to stop somewhere.
The separate trial of the 4 adult suspects is expected to wrap up in the next few weeks. All face a possible death sentence if convicted. The 5th adult, the suspected ringleader, died in jail in an apparent suicide.
South African authorities have been quick to quash rumours that former President Nelson Mandela had been released from hospital, saying that the ailing 95-year-old is still receiving treatment in a Pretoria facility and remains in a critical but stable condition. Mandela was admitted to hospital on June 8th with what officials describe as a recurring lung infection. Catastrophic floods in the Malian capital Bamako have left at least 34 people dead and thousands homeless, according to the latest toll. Rescue operations are still underway along the Niger River that burst its banks in torrential rain on Wednesday, bringing down bridges and houses and submerging entire streets with chest-high muddy waters. Well, the newly elected authorities are concerned that the flooding could lead to widespread displacements as well as disease outbreaks. And in the latest case of industrial accidents in China, at least 15 people have been killed this Saturday after liquid ammonia leaked from a refrigeration unit at a cold storage plant in Shanghai. 25 others were injured in the accident. 5 are said to be in serious condition. Well, the cause of the leak was not immediately known, and investigations led by the city's Work Safety Bureau are underway. Now, firefighters in Portugal have tamed a major blaze, but say they remain on the alert for further outbreaks of the wildfires that have already claimed 5 lives and ravaged thousands of hectares of forest in the centre of the country. Their weeks of intense fire are some of the worst the region has suffered in decades.
Thousands of hectares of forest in the northern and central part of the country have been devastated. The wildfires, fueled by soaring temperatures and strong winds, lasted for more than a month.
Right now, we consider the fire under control. After hours of work, we have all the lines contained. So this fire does not represent a risk anymore.
On Friday, some 1,400 firefighters battled the flames with the help of Spanish and French water-dropping aircraft. Locals helped by tipping buckets of water and beating back the fire with branches. But many villages have been entirely wiped out.
I never want to live that again. It was horrible. It felt like hell was tumbling down on us.
With no rain in sight, Portuguese officials fear new fires could start. 600 firefighters will continue to work on the giant perimeter until Tuesday.
Let's get some cultural news now. Michael Douglas has been hitting the headlines this week, what with the announcement of his separation from wife Catherine Zeta-Jones. But this Saturday, the American actor put the spotlight back on his art, opening the 39th edition of the Deauville Film Festival with his latest starring role as flamboyant entertainer Liberace in Steven Soderbergh's biopic Behind the Candelabra. Catherine Viette rolls out the red carpet for us.
Michael Douglas hits the red carpet again at the Deauville Film Festival. It's his 4th trip to the Normandy seaside resort.
I always have a nice time to catch up. The food is great. You get an evening like this, huh? So, un bon weekend pour les Français autour.
This year, Douglas is here with director Steven Soderbergh to showcase their film Behind the Candelabra.
Wow!
It's a biopic of flamboyant musician and entertainer Liberace, who died of AIDS in 1987. Michael Douglas shares screen time with Matt Damon, who plays his much younger lover in the movie. Frustrated over the difficulties in financing the project, Soderbergh said he's taking a break from Hollywood.
I'm still going to be working. I'm doing some television and some theater, but for now, movies and I are having a trial separation.
14 films in all are vying for the festival's grand prize, with the jury presided over by French actor Vincent Lindon. Among the Hollywood stars expected this week, John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, and Cate Blanchett, who will promote Woody Allen's latest flick, Blue Jasmine. Awards will be announced September 7th.
On that, we leave this edition. Stay tuned to France 24.